There. Now, there's a push from some on government benches for a full audit of all parliamentarians. One of those is former Defence Minister Kevin Andrews. He joins us now in the studio. Mr Andrews, good morning,
to you. Michael.
We'll talk about the audit in just a moment, but what's your view on Josh Frydenberg's situation?
Well, we don't know, and that's the problem here, that it seems like every other day another case arises. We had Senator Parry recently. I saw there's some questions in the media about Senator O'Neill. We've now got Mr Frydenberg. We need to cut through this because, as a matter of principle, members of Parliament should uphold the Constitution. If we don't, how can we expect Australians to respect it? But as a matter of pragmatic politics, this has now become a festering sore for the government. We can't talk about anything else. We need to get this resolved.
Josh Frydenberg says these claims are completely baseless. He insists he's an Australian citizen. You're a colleague of his. Do you accept what he's saying?
I accept what Mr Frydenberg says, but the problem here is that this story just keeps running day after day after day. We have to resolve it, otherwise we can't get on with what government should be about. We can do that by having an audit, and that's what I believe we should do.
Very strong pushback on that from the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. Malcolm Turnbull says an audit would be unnecessarily complex.
Look, I don't think that's the case. When, for example, Mr Joyce needed to find out about New Zealand citizenship, those details were provided to him by New Zealand. If there is a question here about Hungarian citizenship for Mr Frydenberg, then I'm sure the Hungarian authorities can provide answers to that. They've been provided when people have been pushed to provide the answers, so let's just do it and get this out of the way.
What's your view on, we all know Stephen Parry has now stepped down because he has found he's a dual citizen. What do you think of Mitch Firefield's situation, where he himself has revealed that Stephen Parry came to him some weeks ago confiding in him? How do you think the communication...
There seems to have been an attitude here of let's wait and see, in the case of Mr Parry, in the case of Mr Joyce himself.
Yeah, but there's a High Court ruling coming up. Wasn't that a proper way to go?
Well, that may have been the attitude that was taken, but my view about this is that individually and collectively as members of Parliament, we should uphold the Constitution if we want Australians to respect that Constitution. So now we've got the High Court ruling. It's a question not of what the law is, it's a question of compliance, and we should ensure that everybody is complying with the law.
Was Mitch Firefield engaging in a cover-up, in your view?
Look, I don't know what conversations occurred between Mr Parry and Senator Fifield, but the reality is now we're in this situation, and what we need by way of a strong and decisive response is to have an audit, make sure everybody is okay. If they're not, well, then there are consequences that flow.
You've used those two words, strong and decisive, a fair bit in the last 24 hours. You say Australia needs strong and decisive leadership. Is not Malcolm Turnbull providing that?
What I'm reflecting is what hundreds, if not thousands, of Australians have been telling me for the last weeks and months. People have a sense at the moment that there's a lot of spin and obfuscation about various issues. What they want is a clear response to the challenges facing the nation, some honest conversation with what's going on, and at the moment people are feeling very frustrated.
Is Malcolm Turnbull the man to do that?
Well, he's the leader at the moment, and when I'm saying...
What do you mean at the moment?
Well, he's the leader, he's the Prime Minister. I'm simply saying he's the Prime Minister. But what we have at the moment is a clear frustration on the part of the Australian public that they're not getting what they want, and whoever the leader is, then they need to be responding to this. And Mr Turnbull is the leader. There's no move to change him that I'm aware of, but we do need to respond to the Australian people. We need to listen to them, and we need to lead.
We do know that you've haven't been happy with Malcolm Turnbull for a long time. He sacked you as Defence Minister when he took over the Prime Ministership. You're very closely aligned to Tony Abbott. So why, therefore, given all of that, is not this a case of very bad sour grapes, Kevin Andrews?
This is not about me. This is about Australia and our future. This is about reflecting what, as I said, hundreds, if not thousands of Australians have been saying to me. They feel a deep sense of frustration at the moment, and we've got to resolve that. If we don't resolve it, then the government's just going around in circles. So this is an example of an issue where we can resolve it by having an audit, by making sure everything is in line, and then we can get on with the real issues, and they're things like the cost of living pressures on ordinary Australians.
You say Australians really want an answer to this, but certainly you would know after the events of the last 7 years, Australians have no appetite at all for yet another leadership change.
And I think this merry-go-round of leadership that we've had for the last 7 or 8 years has been part of the problem. But we've got to listen to Australians, we've got to learn from the lessons, we've got to understand what the challenges are facing them, we've got to be upfront and honest with them, and then show some leadership.
In 2009, you ran as essentially a stalking horse in the leadership challenge that saw Tony Abbott beat Malcolm Turnbull. Do you see a situation of you doing that again?
Well, can I correct you, Michael? I wasn't a stalking horse for anybody. 2009, I believed there needed to be a change, and I was prepared to put my hand up. As a consequence of that, there was a change, but I wasn't stalking for anybody in particular. Now, there isn't a vacancy at the moment. The Prime Minister's there. There's no mood or appetite on the basis of this merry-go-round we've had for years for yet another change, but we've got to show some leadership and we've got to reflect the concerns and the frustrations of the people of Australia.
The big question is, the most important question for any leader is there a mood or an appetite for change on the backbench? Are you not one of a few isolated voices here?
Look, I'm reflecting what I hear. My role as a Member of Parliament is to reflect the voices of my constituents and, more broadly, the voices of the people of Australia. And that's what I'll continue to do.
Just before we go, we have the deadline of next Tuesday, I think, for the return of the postal survey forms for the same-sex marriage ballot. You have been a very prominent no campaigner. What's your view on where this very important decision will go?
Look, obviously I don't know, and none of us do, but I think it'll be much closer than has been suggested.
How close?
Look, I don't know, but I think it's going to be closer than, predictions that it was going to be a 70-30 result or, 60-40 result. I think it'll be closer than that, but I don't know.
Tony Abbott says a 40% vote for the no case, which would be a loss, of course, but he'd see that as a moral victory. How do you explain that?
Well, people have got concerns about not just this question of equality, which has been the pitch of the yes case, but they've got concerns about freedoms of speech, of freedom of religion, belief, expression of those sorts of things. And if 40% of people say no, that'll be an expression that there is a great deal of concern about some of the consequences that flow from a yes vote.
But if there's, hypothetically speaking, a 60-40 cut, 60% yes, do you accept that this will be legislated by the end of the year?
If there's a yes vote, and it's a clear yes vote, then I think the mood of the Parliament would quite clearly be to legislate it. I don't know what the time frame will be, but a mood to legislate it. That's always been the case. That's why I've believed that the Australian people should have a say about this, which they are, and it looks like almost 80% of Australians will have voted, and that will be a clear indication from them, presumably depending on the outcome, but if it's a clear outcome, a clear indication of what their mood is.
We'll all find out on November the 15th. Kevin Andrews, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
My pleasure, Michael.